Following the death of the star in that massive supernova explosion I'm putting at the nadir of the Enneagram, things get increasingly more speculative from a scientific point of view, and so I'm going to be taking a little more creative license with how I associate the points 5, 6, 7, and 8 on the Enneagram with the life cycle of a star. Recall that the fate of the star depends largely on its mass. The smaller the mass of the star, the more likely it's going to fade out of existence as a white dwarf, which I'm associating with the point 4 on the Enneagram. The really massive stars after a supernova explosion can collapse directly into a black hole, which I'm putting with the point 6 on the Enneagram. Appropriately enough, stars with an intermediary mass after a supernova explosion can collapse into a neutron star, which I'm associating with the point 5 on the Enneagram. And so the neutron star and the point 5 on the Enneagram share this kind of intermediary quality. Just as the neutron star has come through essentially the death of the star in that supernova explosion, and yet there's still a little piece holding on. It hasn't collapsed all the way under the pressure of gravity into a black hole. So also the point 5 and the type 5 on the Enneagram has this kind of intermediary quality. The type 5 can have a sense of standing in two worlds at the same time, a kind of Bardacci or shamanic quality that gives the type 5 a kind of mystical aura oftentimes. Now, we've already seen how a supernova explosion can happen when a white dwarf accretes enough mass from its binary stellar companion to ignite runaway nuclear fusion in its core. But a supernova can also occur when a massive main sequence star ceases thermonuclear fusion in its core and collapses under gravitational pressure. The main sequence star, which I'm associating with the point 3 on the Enneagram, is an element factory. It's fusing increasingly heavier elements in its core. And each time it's fusing a heavier element in its core, a new shell is created around its core, kind of like layers of an onion. When the star reaches iron, the thermonuclear fusion process ceases. Iron takes too much energy to fuse. And at that point, the star explodes, and all those shells explode off of the star, and all of those elements are spread all over the universe in a supernova explosion. As the shells explode, a tiny dead core is left behind. This is the neutron star, so named because the collapsing pressure fuses together its negatively charged electrons with its positively charged protons to form an abundance of neutrons, those subatomic particles with no net charge, sometimes said to have a neutral charge. At an atomic level, most of matter consists of empty space, tiny nuclei with protons in them and electrons orbiting around it at a relatively great distance. Now, if we were to collapse all that empty space out and collapse those electrons down into the nuclei, it would be like taking a rock the size of a football stadium and crushing all the empty space out of it down to the size of a pebble. That pebble would weigh 4 million tons. This is essentially what's happening with the neutron star. So the neutron star is a cosmic pebble. The distillation and concentration of neutrons, squeezed together by gravity, make neutron stars relatively tiny stellar objects, much smaller than Earth or a white dwarf. In fact, they're so compact that a neutron star is like taking 2 to 3 of our suns and squeezing them down to the size of a city like Los Angeles or New York. And they're so dense that a teaspoon of neutron star weighs more than Mount Everest, more than all the people on the planet Earth combined. And so not unlike those often eccentric type 5s, it's not uncommon to hear the words weird, strange, and extreme used in conjunction with the neutron star. Moreover, because they're so small and often surrounded by gas and dust and other material, they are usually hidden from view. They're hard to see. And in the case of the neutron star inside the Crab Nebula, we only know of its existence because of the radio waves it emits. These radio waves, these sounds that we can hear with our radio telescopes, happen when the neutron star is spinning very rapidly, up to 43,000 times per minute. When a neutron star spins rapidly, it develops an extremely intense magnetic field, and it emits radiation in a thin, concentrated beam at its magnetic poles. This radiation, as the neutron star is spinning, sweeps across the universe, kind of like a cosmic lighthouse, so that from a distance it looks like the star is pulsing. That's why these neutron stars are called pulsars. Scientists are still investigating how the pulsar emits radiation. In rotation-powered pulsars, it may be that the electrons coming off of the pulsar are sped up very quickly and interact with the magnetic field to create the beams of radiation. In accretion-powered pulsars, however, the pulsar is accreting material from a binary stellar companion. That material, as it's infalling on the pulsar, is also releasing excess energy, which gets driven to the magnetic poles, concentrated in beams, and shot out as radiation, often in the form of X-rays or gamma rays. This feature of both drawing in material and radiating or reflecting it back out is why I relate the neutron star and the pulsar and the type 5 with the quality of reflecting. Just as a mirror can reflect the light of the sun back onto a wall or another surface, so also the 0.5 on the Enneagram represents in all of us the birth of individual consciousness, that ability for reality to reflect back on itself. Along with reflecting are the activities of distilling and retaining reality. Distilling includes refining, condensing, and concentrating reality. Just as gravity forms the neutron star by squeezing out all that empty space, it condenses the core of the main sequence star down to that tiny cosmic pebble, that atomic core of neutrons. And just as the pulsar is channeling and emitting all of that radiation into those thin concentrated beams that are emitted around its magnetic poles, so also does the type 5 structure habitually distill and concentrate energy into the head center. So much so that they often have trouble with insomnia, trouble sleeping, because so much energy has been concentrated in the head that they have so much rattling around that they can't get to sleep at night. Moreover, distilling can refer to a kind of trickling out. And in this sense, fives distill by trickling out bits of their emotional life, much to the chagrin of their romantic partners, who oftentimes want a little bit more emotional responsiveness from their beloved type 5s. With respect to retaining, just as the neutron star represents the retention of that sliver of the core of the star after the death of the star in the supernova explosion, it doesn't quite collapse all the way into a black hole, so also does the type 5 retain a little piece of him or herself just for themselves. And the type 5 represents in all of us that sliver of witnessing consciousness that we continue to hold on to. Also associating the neutron star and pulsar with the 0.5 are the activities of detaching and observing. Just as that tiny neutron star can seem so detached, so hidden from view, and so difficult to see, so also the type 5 structure habitually detaches and observes reality rather than coming into full contact with life, rather than fully participating. In fact, type 5s report that they can dissociate from themselves, particularly in times of stress. They can actually observe themselves in a situation as if watching from a distance. This is primarily a fear response. This is the way the type 5 structure protects itself. Moreover, just as the neutron stars are associated with neutrality, because they have all those neutrons, those particles with no net charge or a neutral charge, so also the type 5 structure prides itself on being neutral in its detachment. Type 5s believe that they are objective observers of reality. Moreover, pulsars help us to observe and investigate the universe. Like those so often eccentric type 5s, each pulsar is unique. It has its own spin rate and radio pulse profile. Now, the regularity of each pulsar's spin and the precision of their distantly observed pulses make them ideal probes for observing and investigating a whole range of phenomena in the interstellar medium. This is why pulsars are some of the best timekeepers in the universe. They're like cosmic clocks, and the precision of each unique pulsar's spin rate make them ideal objective reference points that we can use to measure all kinds of phenomena in the interstellar medium, all kinds of ways that we can investigate and probe the universe. Moreover, the radiation emitted by pulsars includes not only radio waves and gamma rays, but X-rays. And X-rays are a great metaphor for the type 5 structure because X-rays allow us to see into things. They render things transparent without fully contacting them. And so it's like that type 5 propensity to observe and investigate without fully contacting life. It also speaks to that type 5 propensity or leaning into a kind of voyeurism. Moreover, the radiation emitted by the pulsar in those thin, concentrated beams is thought to be related to a misalignment between the neutron star's rotation axis on the one hand and its magnetic axis on the other hand. And so also for the type 5 structure, misalignment is a critical feature to detached observation. The type 5 habitually focuses and concentrates so much energy in the head center as a part of that detached observation that there's a misalignment oftentimes between the head center on the one hand and the heart and body centers on the other hand. With respect to the body center, the misalignment can result in a kind of jerkiness in the type 5's bodily movements. And with respect to the heart center, This misalignment can manifest in a kind of inability to access emotions in real time. There's a disconnect between the emotional soundtrack, if you will, and the film that's being created by all of that detached observation. This misalignment is often realigned later when the type 5 is secluded and alone in private. The first cognitive fixation of the type 5, which I'm exploring, is isolating, causing a person to be or remain alone or apart, as in cloistered or secluded, obtaining or extracting in pure form. In addition to how those tiny neutron stars are cloistered or secluded, and in addition to that quality of purity or extraction, which might relate to how the neutron stars have an abundance of neutrons in their core, the shell and the core of the neutron star also relate to isolating in a couple of other ways. Neutron stars have extremely intense gravity and extremely hot surface temperatures. The shell is a super flat surface, and it's a super thin crust. It's only a mile thick. But it's also a super hard crust. It's a billion times stronger than steel. This steely crust shields a heavy, soupy, sensitive core of neutrons and other particles inside. Similarly, type 5s can isolate themselves behind a very hard, crusty emotional surface that nonetheless protects a very sensitive core inside. 5s tend to be very sensitive people. Moreover, 5s love their alone time, they love their privacy, and they can isolate, they can cloister or seclude themselves even amidst other people. Moreover, this sensitive interior, this core of the type 5, tends to be very quirky, much like the quirkiness of the core of a neutron star. It's thought, for example, that solitary quarks might reside in the core of a neutron star. Now, this would be highly unusual. It would flout all the ordinary laws and conventions of science. Why? Because usually these fundamental particles, these quarks, live in composite chunks, never alone. But it's thought that inside of a neutron star, they might be able to reside as free particles. Now, the type 5 structure tends to similarly be unconventional, tends to flout the ordinary laws, conventions, mores, manners of society. Also, type 5s can sometimes have difficulties working in groups. They like to work alone. They like their isolation. They love their freedom, their autonomy, and their self-sufficiency. Moreover, because of the density of the core of the neutron star, it's thought that strange new particles may be emerging within its core. Similarly, the type 5 is on the edge of knowing, on the edge of knowledge, and the type 5 can either spin out into very strange, bizarre theories and ideas, or can have breakthroughs of remarkable genius. The other aspect of isolating is quarantining, or making a boundary around something to deal with it separately, and I'm including here secreting and concealing. In addition to creating and maintaining firm boundaries and secreting a part of themselves away from other people, 5s have a tendency to compartmentalize. They compartmentalize their thoughts, taking up one subject area at a time and putting it down in turn, as well as they compartmentalize, or have a tendency to compartmentalize, their relationships, having one group of friends over here, another over here, and a third over here. And it may be that these different groups, these different compartments, will never mix or meet. Why? This might be very fearful for the type 5. This would mean that the type 5 would feel very exposed. Finally, the activities of extracting in pure form and creating boundaries around things to deal with them separately, one at a time, relate to the 5's love of science. 5s love that idea of isolating an independent variable in order to see how things work, how they fit together. 5s love to take apart reality down to its component parts, to isolate those little pieces and see how they all work together. The second cognitive fixation is reducing, to bring down to the smallest extent, to bring under control. Just as the neutron star results from the main sequence star's core being reduced down to the smallest extent, all that empty space pushed out by gravity, so also the type 5 structure habitually reduces, particularly with respect to their needs and expectations. Type 5s have a fundamental distrust that reality will ever provide for their needs, and so as a response to that, type 5s habitually do without. Type 5s withdraw and reduce their needs to the point of the barest minimum, and this gives type 5s a sense of control. This idea that I can do without leads me to have little dependencies, or as few dependencies on other people or situations as possible. And this lack of dependencies gives the type 5s a sense of autonomy, self-sufficiency, like those quirky quarks that can live in isolation inside the core of a neutron star. However, this sense of diminishment, which comes in the forms of diminishing expectations, unlike the cousins on the other side of the fear triad, the type 7s, who can go off into all kinds of expectations, imagine all kinds of possibilities for the future. 5s tend to do with that. They tend to diminish those expectations. And as a result, that diminishment can lead into a kind of cycle, because the more 5s diminish their expectations, diminish their lives, in fact, the more they tend to generate a mindset of scarcity, of impoverishment. And the more they have a mindset of scarcity and impoverishment, the more they reduce, the more they diminish. And this cycle of diminishment can lead, in unfortunate circumstances, to a truly diminished life. Also in reducing is to treat analytically, rendering complex ideas simple. Many type 5s love to reduce complex ideas or even complex situations down to something simple, something manageable, some little compartment or nugget of knowledge that they can produce, that they can hold, that they can grasp. And in a lower functioning way, this sort of simplicity leads to a kind of reductionism in the form of, for example, scientific reductionism, reducing everything so further down to their component parts that the whole is missed. 5s can sometimes have difficulty seeing things holistically or seeing the interconnections and the web of relationships. Also, this reductionist thinking can lead 5s to sometimes have a kind of one-track mindset. They can be so narrow, so focused in their specialty or so focused in their particular point of view that they kind of have almost like blinders on, and they're unable to see how that view can be opened up and reconnected and integrated into other disciplines or other views. On the upside, however, a really integrated 5 for all of us can use this kind of reducing to create really pithy bits of wisdom. For wisdom really comes at its best form, in the form of something so very simple. Finally, reducing includes to diminish, as in to reduce someone to size. At times, type 5s can be very arrogant. They can be very dismissive or diminishing of other people. 5s get especially triggered around issues of competency. Type 5s are really attached to and their own mastery of a particular area of knowledge, their specialized fields of knowledge. And so type 5s get triggered when they're hearing other people talk about things that they don't know about, going outside of their own boundaries of knowledge. And type 5s also get triggered around issues of competency. If they feel like their competency is being called into question, or if they're feeling in any way diminished or reduced, they can sometimes turn that around on the other person and make them be the ones that are feeling intellectually inferior or reduced in size. And this relates all to how the type 5s can actually have very explosive episodes of rage, explosive episodes of anger. And when type 5s move along their connecting line to express the lower side of their type 8, type 5s can explode in intense anger and rage. In fact, so surprisingly intense can the 5's response be that it's sometimes said that the 5's rage can cower the usually intense type 8s. In any event, it turns out that neutron stars are also associated with extremely violent cosmic events. For example, 2 neutron stars can come close to each other and begin to spin around each other rapidly, and they can collide in a very violent explosion. Now, this collision can result in a merger of the 2 stars or a collapse into a black hole, but it's also said that the collision of 2 neutron stars is what spreads gold all over the universe. Neutron stars are responsible for gold dust. The connection between gold and the neutron star in the point 5 and the type 5 calls to mind several associations. First of all, when a type 5 truly does bring themselves forward, when we really get to see the insides of those really quirky, wonderful type 5 personalities, it can be like sharing the preciousness of gold. It's so wonderful to share a life with a type 5. Also, when 2 or more type 5s begin to collaborate, as they sometimes do, especially in areas of their fields of knowledge, that collaboration can produce very precious works of genius, works that can uplift all of humanity, in fact. But the connection with gold also leads to the passion of the type 5, which is avarice. Just as gold is associated with hoarding and it's associated with materialism of all kinds, so too is avarice, greed, attachment, holding on. And it's especially true with regard to retaining and measuring out time and energy. Type 5s tend to have a mindset of scarcity, a mindset that there's not enough time and energy in their life to go around. And so type 5s can be very sensitive to intrusions or perceived intrusions on their time and energy. They tend to hoard their time and energy and measure it out very carefully. They like to know, they like to boundaries and compartmentalize what amount of time and energy any particular meeting or situation or person is going to take from them. And this kind of measuring out reminds me a little bit of how the pulsar is that precise universal clock, that cosmic clock, that precise timekeeper, measuring out time, and we can use that to measure other interstellar phenomena. Finally, avarice relates to holding on to oneself. The type 5 in all of us has that existential avarice. It's that holding on to that sense of a fixed, separate, stable, permanent sense of self, that sense of identity, that sliver of witnessing consciousness that we call me and mine, we call precious, and we hold on to it, we hoard it. This attachment, this clinging is at the root of our suffering. And it's the type 5 paradox that the type 5s are the extreme in terms of detaching and the extreme in terms of attaching. Type 5s can detach, withdraw, isolate, seclude, come into seclusion not only from other people or situations, but also detach and withdraw into their head center. And at the same time, type 5s attach quite voraciously, quite intensely to that little piece that's left. Type 5s hold on to that attachment so tightly. And so it's that journey between detachment and attachment that is the journey for the type 5 in all of us. And this is the journey to non-attachment. This is when things are allowed to come and to come into our lives, to be contacted with, to be participated with, to be seen, to be known fully and completely, and in due time to be let go of completely without remainder. And so it's this coming and this going. It's the ability to hold on to something and let it go and open our hands again to the next moment. It's this open receptivity that is at the heart of non-attachment. And this is the heart of the journey for the type 5 in all of us. And when this happens, we become truly open. We step out of a diminished and impoverished life and into the fullness of our being, which can then be generously shared with others.